I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which this podcast is recorded, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging.
Dark Mirror.
Dark Mirror.
Dark Mirror.
Dark Mirror.
Dark Mirror with Jessicka and.
Welcome to Dark Mirror. It is me, your host, Jessicka Ann, and today's conversation with Dane Tomas is a particularly spicy one. For those of you that are familiar with Dane, I'm sure that comes as no surprise. However, if you haven't heard of Dane, he is an industry veteran, having worked in the coaching and facilitation space for over 20 years. He is the creator of the Spiral modality and the founder of the Spiral Institute, which he sold in 2021. However, his legacy continues and has had a huge impact on myself and the way that I facilitate personally. He's also the author of 8 books and is currently studying at the Tavistock Institute to better understand the structures of power and how we relate to it, which really flavors a lot of the conversations that we get into here. Dane has also got his upcoming program called Master Your Message, which he is bringing through in late July. And if you connect with him on Instagram and let him know that you heard about it on this podcast, he has got a special offer for you. Without further ado, here's my episode with Dane Tomas. The first question I wanted to ask is, this conversation is really going into the weeds around our relationship with connection and authenticity. What has been your journey with authenticity? Why is this a thread that has pulled your attention?
I think, if I take a macro lens, like a long-term look at my life, I grew up in a house where kind of largely you could be yourself, in my family. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a family of black sheep in a weird sort of way, and I was the black sheep of the black sheep. But in school and culture and community, I definitely didn't feel that I could be myself, particularly in my early adolescence, and that sort of era was quite tumultuous. And that imprint kind of meant that I spent a lot of time trying to find places that I could be authentic. Not that I knew what that meant as a teenager or 20-year-old or whatever, but I definitely gravitated towards sort of more fringe spaces. And I would say that one of the big drivers of that was like, just want to be authentic, just want to be real, man. I just want to be myself, why can't I be myself? And like that sort of underlying drive shaped a lot of my choices around subcultures that I've been a part of and communities that I've been a part of. And also my approach to business, was very much on the terms of like, I need to do this the way that I want to do this. I don't want to do this the way that I'm told I'm supposed to do this. And that, it all feels like it's settled down a lot over time. Like I'm 47 now, and I feel that I'm quite comfortable in my authenticity. And I probably am starting to see that maybe that's an overemphasized value in certain stages of development, and particularly in kind of new agey spiritual culture. It's everyone's just going to be so authentic, and of course there's a performative authenticity, but also there can be an immaturity that comes with that around like, does every moment have to be authentic? What does that even mean? And like, how does that work when you're trying to do things that you don't know about yet? Like, it's not going to feel authentic to get up on stage and give a talk if you haven't done it before, or to market yourself, or to just to do anything, so it's a catch-22, and that I feel that the void of missing freedom of authenticity has maybe driven my life. And now I feel like I'm probably in a place of like, yeah, I'm authentic, so what, that's kind of the story arc of the last 30 years, I suppose.
I love that. There's so many places I already want to go with you, and I feel like I have about 10 tabs open. And so where do we start? Because part of like, obviously you've been a huge influence in my life, not only through your work with the spiral, but I've had the opportunity to work with you in a few other capacities. And I feel like you have such a highly developed ability to understand systems. And I almost kind of want to get the shit tester part of you out here and kind of playing as well. Um, I feel like in some ways, isn't Trump the logical conclusion of authenticity taken to its fullness?
That's an interesting thing. Is it authenticity, or is it kind of like the logical conclusion of a culture built on you can do what you want, like selfish self-interest, self-interest, which has beautiful parts of, like the entrepreneur, like I've always loved the entrepreneurial freedom that comes from the American, vision, and like freedom, yeah, freedom, including freedom to be a fucking total asshole to everyone, and freedom to, it's like, okay, like some of these values that seem so noble to start off with, if you put them at the top of a value stack and run it for long enough, you start to get to a place like, really? So authentic just means you just, okay, you do whatever the fuck you want, or freedom just means like you can't have any discipline or morals or commitment to anything that makes you, like every value taken to its extreme will reveal its dysfunction, I suppose. And I think, yeah, I mean, who hasn't been tracking or analyzing Trump and what he represents and so on? Like, I'm sure everyone has their take, right? Like, I was thinking today, this morning, actually, I was like, would he be the most talked about human on planet Earth? I
Yeah.
assume so. Like, right now, like, surely, are there more Trump conversations than Jesus conversations right now? Possibly, you know? That's entirely possible. But yeah, I think there's something, I don't know if I even want to get into all that, but like, there's something for me around, how I was explaining it the other day. There's a power in someone being empty enough that they can step into like an archetypal or mythic um, current and be kind of driven by that. And I think, but by the way, anyone listening, even this is in a snippet, this is not, I'm not saying this admiringly, okay? I'm just saying that, like, I think, I think Hitler did that, and I think Trump, there's a lot of comparisons of Trump to Hitler for various reasons. And I think Trump has somehow stepped into, like, maybe the American dream is, the American empire is dying. So of course there's a strong movement of like, no, we can save it. We can be on top again, and I think someone who's been willing to step into that current, then, and with enough kind of, I don't know whether it's sociopathy. I don't really fully understand how Trump is built inside. I have some inklings of what I think, but I think someone who's willing to use that, um, almost like mythic momentum that, a culture that knows it's on the way down wants to fight and regain its power. So the whole make America great again thing. Like, of course that works, because maybe America can sense it's on the cusp of not being great and it wants to still be. So almost there's some power of being able to step into that. So I don't know if it's authenticity. I would say there is an uncommon comfort with power in that person for whatever reason, good, bad, ugly, developmentally, however we want to look at it. Like, I think there's something to do with power and congruence is a strange word, but an okayness to just be in power that so many people seem to bow to, like this person is operating, I think, quite instinctively a lot of the time. And people seem to just be like, oh, okay, he's ripping up the rule book. Oh, I guess that's bad, but well, he's done it now. Nothing we can do, and it's like, oh, this, it's very fascinating. I'm going to park that there so we don't fill the whole conversation with old mate. But
That question came in, it was like my little chaos agent wanting to go there. But the reason I felt comfortable to ask you that question, why I feel it's an important question, is we kind of pedestal specific values. To your point, it's like,
Yeah.
great. What is the endpoint of authenticity? Where does it actually become its own way of? How does it become weaponized? How does it become something you hide behind?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's worked a lot with values and purpose, I feel like I've got 20 years of good experiments there, from the NLP days and then the Spiral days. And actually, a lesser known product that I had alongside Spiral that I couldn't scale was called Soul Values. And I would muscle test people and diagnose them what their values of their soul were based on this little um, seven chakra, seven values per chakra and matrix that I would, and I would pronounce, these are your soul values, right? And it was very in my own kind of uh what's the word, in my own kind of egotistical spiritual, I will tell you what the truth of your soul is. Let's come here and I'll test you, but I still use mine a little bit and they've been quite effective for me. And I guess one of the things I have come to hold about values is they really only work in a stack, and it's like if we're programming AI or whatever, if you gave it one value, well, it will just run that fucking value ad infinitum, and then eventually that value will become toxic. Um, and so if something has a value of make money, and that's the only value, it's oof, look out, that's just going to do whatever it needs to do. But if it's like make money, provide service, um, protect the ecology of the planet, okay, those three values would start to work in a dynamic tension. And if you could hold 5 or 7 values and they're well chosen, then you might get some sort of homeostasis that is a more healthy, whether it's a being or a nation or whatever, you'd get a more healthy stack. But if you just have one thing that runs you, I think we're going to get asymmetrical and probably ultimately toxic results when something just becomes, all I care is about being authentic. It's like, okay, well, you don't care about hurting people, you don't care about this, that, the other. And so, yeah, I think sometimes, and I think I have a feeling we're going to go there, but I think sometimes with new age and spiritual and personal development culture, we can, we pedestal one value over others, and that becomes, well, we get to see the results of sometimes poorly chosen or immature um, values and needs running the show, and then we wonder why we get down the track things have worked out badly, I guess.
Mm. I appreciate the way you've articulated that. For me, part of the goal of this project is looking at that macro and micro level. It's like, cool, we talk about workshop culture. Part of why I brought Trump into it, aside from chaos, was also that's the macro. It's like if we have this value stack that maybe is creating something that isn't ecological, what is the result at the end point?
Yeah.
So to bring it back into more of tangible conversation though, in new age spaces, I've been really curious around where you see this going. If this is an experiment that's really kicked into gear, particularly off the back end of the pandemic, where are we headed?
Who's we in this conversation?
The new ages, the spiritual
The new
humans.
ages. Yeah, I mean, like, we have to go integral and beyond, like, um, we have to, like, the way I see it is the new age is largely stuck in the orange and green meme levels, which to do just a micro speed run spiral dynamics, orange is the meme that runs essentially technology and capitalism. It's the meme of expansion and growth and individual personal achievement, which is very personal development and business. And then the green meme is about the sensitive self and um, spiritual community and belonging and inclusion and depth of feelings and meaning and all that. And I guess with those two levels are running in an awkward um, suit, you know? and we haven't really yet embraced complexity. I think this is my main. I almost feel like I'm taking a break from new age spaces, but I don't know that I can ever not be a new age person. I just, it's just formed my whole, it's been 30 plus years of spiritual this and whatever, personal development, that it's very interwoven, and who I still feel when I'm designing products and services, that's who I want to serve, and this somewhat, let me rewind. I still believe in people are actively participating in the function of spiritually unfolding. Like that's still a good thing, right? That's still, we want to do that. I think the new age and the modern version of that, which is like spiritual workshop culture, has or is hitting a bit of a dead end. That seems to be to me to be true, which doesn't mean I kind of want to temper like cynicism and with realism, which doesn't mean it's not worth anything, doesn't mean it's not achieving anything. I think a lot of good work happens in those spaces and it's still happening and still needs to happen. But if you've been in those spaces for long enough, you start to clock like this is a lot of the same shit repeating over and over. And, a lot of people aren't maybe progressing in the ways that they think they are or hope they are or wish they were, is this way of doing things delivering? And I think where we need to go is beginning to take lessons and fusions and information not from within inside the new age. So we've got this issue where what's happened. Okay, we've appropriated all the spiritual bits, tech we can get our hands on. We've pulled Buddhism, we've pulled fucking law of attraction, we've pulled shamanic stuff, we've pulled as many bits and pieces as we can, and we're melting them over and over in the pot. Sometimes well, sometimes badly. And the new thought to personal development, lineage, all that's been pulled together, and we're kind of like mixing and matching lineages and threads. And I've always thought of it. It's a bit like the UFC, right? It's a bit like spiritual MMA. We're trying to hybridize to find the best, which martial art will win, and we found out that mixed martial arts wins, like that's been proven in that world. If you're a mixed martial artist, you'll be able to beat a boxer or a wrestler or a karate guy. If you've got a little bit of everything integrated well, you will be better at combat than someone who's like, I just do kicks. It's like, well done. This guy's going to tackle you, put you on the ground and punch your face in now because his system is more mature, right? And it's a bit of a rant, but I'll pull it back. We know that it's very NLP, very systems cybernetics. We know that the system with the most flexibility controls the system, right? We know that a person with the most flexibility will have the most impact inside of a given system. And so, the new age, it's a bit like the AI slop problem, It's like, okay, we train the LLM on the training data, turned out, but now the training data is infected with AI copy and AI art and AI whatever. So now we're training AIs on the AI on the AI. So it's like, oh, this is just turning into mush. That's what's happening in the workshop space, Okay, so you fucking went to ISTEP and you ripped off ISTEP and now you're a Tantra teacher because you did 2 workshops and now you're teaching 2 or 3 good bits and pieces that you got from somewhere else. And then people come to your workshop and they learn some of those good bits and pieces and now they're a fucking Tantra teacher, This has been watered down so many times over that it's just slop, a lot of it. Or you are in a marketing container that your marketing mentor taught you that they learned from their marketing mentor that their marketing mentor got from fucking Dan Kennedy or Frank Kern or someone who actually fucking innovated something a while ago, and you are 7 levels down the chain and you're proudly showing me the $20,000 mastermind you've joined, and I'm like, this person who's teaching you this they're not deep, they're not anchored. So I think, where we need to go is, firstly, I think we need to recognize we've got some problems. We got some big problems in spiritual community, in, we're calling it workshop culture. I think step one is to start recognizing the problems, and there are many, many problems. And I think only on the other side of that can we start re-engineering and creating spaces, modalities that, that serve the development of the human soul or the human spirit in a more integrated and functional way. Because, we got people living off of a junk food diet and thinking it's gourmet organic food, and it's like, that is, you're eating cheeseburgers, son. You're not eating. It's not the pinnacle of human culinary evolution right there. So I don't know. You've opened a can of worms. I don't have definitely all the answers, but I feel like I have a very good map of where the problems and the cusps, where the limits of it are at, is probably where more I'm at in my development, is starting to track and ask questions around, like, okay, this is a systemic issue that repeats in every whatever men's work container, tantra container, this container. What do we do about that? How do we make things in a more intelligent way? Is kind of where I'm at.
And it was a very broad question, but I was curious to see where you went with it, because, like, as we talk about that kind of synthesis and pulling on a million threads, it kind of reminds me of listening to, like, the inception of the Theosophical Society. It's like we've gone
Right.
to the East and we've learned all of the things and we've brought it back and we've synthesized it. Is this an initiation into wisdom? Is this like the tariff that we have to pay in order to actually evolve?
I think it's an offer of an initiation, you know? Like, it's funny you talked about Trump before. I mean, I feel like we're in a world of rejected initiations. I was watching, because this is the level of depth that I'm at. I was watching the new the new season of Euphoria, the other night, right? And I was like, "Oh, this is like a bunch of rejected initiations. Like, the characters don't go through initiations. They stay shallow, right? Like, they don't, yeah, they don't really deepen. And that's probably a good reflection of a lot of society, and that, like, I'm gonna say this. It's like, this is just, like, Israel didn't learn from the Holocaust. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we're witnessing right now. It's like, wow, you are perpetuating the abuse that you received. That's fucking bad. And I'm not saying, like, bad on even individual Israelis. I'm saying, like, in human culture, that's this is a human responsibility, like an all human responsibility of, like, if we can't metabolize the lessons of the past, we're fucked, right? And so I don't know why I just went there, but I just feel like that's the biggest example I can think of a rejected initiation. But if we come down to the smaller level, um, back to our kind of niche, this is happening all the time. Like, I remember clocking this, maybe I was in my early 30s, and I've been doing a lot of, like, personal development with a kind of business leaning. So, John DeMartini, Robert Kiyosaki, Laurel Longmire was hot. She's gone now. I don't think she's done shit for a decade or whatever. But, The Millionaire Maker, all that kind of vibe was hot. It was like 2000, what would it be? Oh, like 2008 was when I was really starting to come into that world, and I started to do all the things. And um, yeah, lots of money, success, but also with this maybe a spiritual flavor, events, or, personal development meets money, less of an overt spiritual thread to it. But that was the hot thing. and I was doing a lot of those things. And I remember like maybe getting a couple years in and starting to meet the same people at these events. And we'd done the whatever summit. And I'm like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, did you ever make that thing that we were going to do? You're going to do it. Oh, no. Because then I had to fly to whatever to do a such and such personal development. But then we went here and I'm like, oh, this was the first sign. I was like, oh, so we get people who you never produce any results from being in these rooms because you're always in these rooms. And it was like, this was like 20 years ago, right? Nearly 20 years ago. And like, I've been that person plenty, I like to think I've learned after time, okay, absorb the thing, metabolize the thing, see if you can create something or transmit something from that once you've digested it. And there's a sort of cycle there that, I'm doing my best to try to absorb um, whatever I'm learning. But what we largely have is a culture of consumption. So, like it's so fucking like if you're a kind of new age spiritual person, the most cliched form, you kind of want to just go to cool workshops and like learn stuff, but you're also going for social belonging and you're also going to give your life some meaning and you're also going to be part of something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think people fully know that's why they're doing it. So you can be in the story of, I'm doing this for my growth. I'm doing this for my evolution as a soul or as a human being. And maybe you are a little bit, but you're also doing it because you want to belong or you want to find meaning and you want your life to be rich in the sense that you're going somewhere. So it actually, this world of almost infinite transformational stuff creates a situation where it feels like you're going somewhere and you're fucking going nowhere. And to sort of bring it back to so to me, there's a deeper kind of listening that is about, what am I afraid of and what do I not want to do? And like, my life right now, like I've moved to the UK, I'm coming up to 4 months deep here. I've set myself up, house, British passport, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just trying to live a normal life right now, go to the gym on these days, go to the workspace on these days, build out offerings that I want to build out, really fix my health, which is coming along really well compared to where I was after a bunch of mold stuff, and really minimize my exposure to transformational anything because I can feel that the real growth for me is just in consistent behaviors over time that are aligned with who I am and the life that I want to live, which is like, I can feel like there's a bunch of like, plumbers sitting there going, yeah, fucking no shit, mate. Like it's,
You've landed on my key demographic, Dane.
it sounds like you've discovered being a person, like, but like there's a point at which it starts to look like this whole thing is a form of avoidance, of like being boring, getting stuck in a rut, not being being unexceptional, or avoidance of the fact that you're going to die, and in many ways you're not that special, and it's like, no, I am special, I'm unique, I'm a Pleiadian star priestess or whatever the fuck it is, I'm very special. It's like, okay, Sharon, you're special, like, but you're also not special. And I think it's just like at the whole, I guess when I'm rambling around, there just seems a resistance in human beings to be with what is,
Uh,
and that, to be with the trauma, to be with, you're hitting your late 30s, mid 40s, and you're not a celebrity, you're not a multimillionaire, you're not a whatever, you're not the you never made it to the cool kids club, you never, whatever it is, like there's a lot of disappointment in life. And And I think being able to meet that and accept it and just and live and love through that is maybe a more advanced initiation than, you know, whatever, putting a blanket over your head and sticking a crystal up your ass and doing this. Like, even though it's tricky because I've benefited from a ton of ritualistic and initiatory and transformational behaviors, and some has maybe gone deeper than others. But yeah, I think, here's the thing. I know this has been a long kind of ramble in response to your question. I'm so curious when or if people in spiritual bubbles are ever going to be capable of talking about wealth inequality or um, power dynamics or um, marginalized people or any of that stuff, which seems really unsexy if you just want to like manifest or whatever, or be in with your feelings or do those things which are, they're still valid. But it just seems like um, spirituality has become for many a way to escape dealing with the challenges of the world. And that and like it's tricky because I don't want to get either completely bogged down in this stuff and make it the entire conversation, but you know you mentioned the Theosophical Society, and like those roots are in my um spiritual lineage. Theosophical Society was one of the places I started at 19, and you know but it's interesting, teaching at Hyde, and in many ways having a good time, and really being with a lot of what's going on there, and also being like, okay, so you know Alice Bailey is a kind of old English, bit racist lady from Manchester who was channeling some stuff. Is that really um what we're going to center these practices around? Because I'm not really that aligned to that at this point, and like, can we, what is our own one, and like so many spiritual people are going to have to deal with the fact that the person or persons they've been following um were not great, or we're flawed humans with biases and often cultural limitations based on the time and place they came from. And I think that people don't really want to deal with that shit. um the men's work bros don't want to deal with the fact that they you know have probably never met or hung out with a queer person or a trans person, and so their whole fucking framework is just based on this one narrow thing. And I think it's not the end destination, but the new age world has to integrate its own ignorance, I think, is the next first step.
I often talk about that as like spirituality that goes the whole way down. It's like we can float off into the clouds as much as we like, but if we can't actually, good old Jung, it's like, but the roots and the branches both need to be developed, and the branches
Yeah.
are accepting that we basically live with systemic and live and benefit from systemic violence every day.
Mm.
That's the truth. And I feel like the more that we stop turning away, romanticizing, bypassing those truths, the more effective we can be as leaders as well. We're not
Yeah.
just trying to skip over the hard conversations and get to the part where we all on together.
Yeah. And I think, especially for people in some form of leadership, you know, if you're 60 plus, you can probably, if it's your desire, get away with not handling this. You're probably fine. If you're 50 or under, let's say, and you're going to be leading spiritual spaces, particularly, I'm talking, I guess, to white people, particularly, but there's pieces of this for everyone. But if you're like And doubly, if you're like let's just go the whole way. If you're like a cis white male leader, well, yeah, but also cis white women as well, and you're facilitating transformational work or something around that, you're not gonna be able to dodge like power issues and social issues really any longer. Like it's not the the time for that, where that was a possibility has passed. In the same way of like, um, it's not a great era to set yourself up as a creepy guru. 80s peak. That was a good time if you were a narcissistic, um, you know, predatory yogi type. Just no one's going to come for you for 20 years. Um, the world we live in now, there is too much awareness and exposure on what everyone is up to behind closed doors, largely I think because of the internet. And there is, even if you haven't started educating yourself about power, well, many sections of society have. And so there's people going to come for you and want to have conversations with you that you really don't want to have because they're not to your advantage. And like, I'm laughing because, I've gone through this in multiple stages, and like inside the spiral, I was really leading in the early days like a classic little cult leader because that's all I had. There's nothing, I didn't do anything wrong. I developed something that I thought was powerful. I honestly believed and still believe really could change a human being's functionality and level of consciousness. That part, and that part I had some advancement in. Like I definitely had a grasp and an ability to put things together that is most normal people couldn't do. So I have a classic example of there's something here that I've got that is an intelligence or a pattern recognition or a mastery of something. I still think that's accurate. What happens then is you then assume, and people around you will support you in believing that this also means you're an expert in everything else. Why is Elon Musk giving people advice about what they should do in their family life? He doesn't know about that. He's terrible at that. Um, but there's something in society where we don't isolate what people are good at and recognize they're also suck at this, this, and this. We don't recognize that the guy who sat in a cave for 40 years may not have great social, emotional, and definitely not psychosexual skills. Like that person may be actually severely limited in all those areas because they spent 40 years sitting in a cave. So they're a good person to go to learn about meditation. Then they're not a good person to um, empower around telling people what to do with their bodies or who should do this or that. It's a disaster, and we've seen it play out over and over. So basically what I'm trying to say is the level of responsibility that people who are, and also self-appointed spiritual leaders. Hi, everyone. I'm a spiritual teacher. It's like, okay, and you decided that, did you? Okay, great, well done. You just put it in your little Instagram bio, and thus it was true. The level of responsibility and accountability that comes with that is higher than it's ever been, and is going to get higher and higher as the world starts to recognize, people have been appointing themselves as spiritual leaders with minimal accountability, and like it's done. And if you haven't clocked that it's done, this idea of I guess that it's a wild west zone where you can be completely unaccountable. Um, that that era is over, and I think um, the sooner people who are stepping into leadership in these spaces start to clock that, that's going to be a good thing.
I've been thinking a lot about the halo effect, that reality of where we perceive that as one person is good at one thing, they're good at all things. And how I feel so many of the leadership models were kind of offered, particularly for people that are coming into business, is almost to kind of lean into perpetuating this halo effect a bit. So what does it actually look like for people to lead from genuine authenticity?
I mean, it's that word again, hey? Like, I'll tell you, like, this is roundabout answer, haven't they all been? But, like, I watched a guy doing a critique of Diary of the CEO the other day, and it was really good. Like, he was, like, a comedian, but he wasn't doing a comedy bit. He was doing a more like a rational analysis using kind of, um, psychology and neuroscience, basically, and he looking at it through the halo effect lens, and basically saying, from a certain perspective, well, let's look at the there's a lot of things that personal development has trained us in, things that I lived as though they are, um, sacred tenets, and like, what's one of the most seemingly logical ones? If you want to be good at something, consult a person who's good at that thing. It seems like of course, you know, but actually, it's not that simple. And often, someone who is in a certain position has a very limited ability to diagnose how they got there. And, like, and if we took it to an absurd, if you want to be a famous actress, okay, go and ask Sydney Sweeney how to be a famous actress. Like, that's kind of a stupid idea because, like, we're separating two things. We're not separating two things. One is the position someone is in, and two is an understanding of the structure of the journey it's taken to get there, and an ability to take out anything like luck or, you know, um, advantages given by who your parents are or where you were born or any of that, and like, and so again, I guess it comes back to this thing of like, we're in a subculture that is specialized on the subjective, What's happening inside of me is the most important thing. How I feel is the most important thing, you know? What archetypes I have found myself associated with is the most important thing. I'm a high priest. I'm a dragon. I'm a whatever. Okay, fantastic. That's what it's a strength in working with the inner subjective reality, which is valuable. It is really valuable, but that comes with a weakness at assessing, um, socioeconomic, macro stuff. And so a lot of billionaires, for example, they might not have a fully accurate understanding and belief system of how they got there. They have most likely, this is the most charitable interpretation, deleted or favorably interpreted the circumstances, you know, to get there. And also, it's not in their best interest to go, you know what, in the early days, I fucked a lot of people over. I'm a little bit ruthless. And now I'm at the top. I can act really magnanimous, but woof, this first 10 years, I fucked over every single fucking person that got in my way. And I fucking finished some of those. You're never going to hear that interview, Um, I am quite certain that is in the mix, You're also not gonna hear, well, first and foremost, let's acknowledge my father owned a diamond mine. Let's start there. So from that humble beginnings, okay, there's so much of that shit not in the message. So when it's like, okay, here's my 5 tips, and you watch some little snippet, it's fucking next to useless. It's next to useless. Um, and it doesn't take into account, you know, 99% of reality that's going on. So much of that, um, and like, let's say sort of spiritual teachers and leaders in certain spaces, like there's this thing where so many people, Byron Katie, Joe Dispenza, whatever, they're all getting debunked or they're all getting, exposed as like shitty people in some context. And I don't put that as a total blanket judgment on the moral value of these people. I just think they're people. But there's almost a thing of when someone's been held up as, um, better than, really special, highly developed, and then we're like, and she was a fucking bitch, and then they did this, and then they canceled me. It's like, doesn't seem like what someone would do if they were a completely enlightened, loving being. It's like, look, they just invented a method, okay? Just figured out a little method of reversing it around and it pops you out of your shit. It's a great method, you know? Okay, John bullied me. What if the opposite was true? John didn't bully me? Oh, revolutionary, you know? I just, like, it's great. It doesn't mean the person who figured that out is in a perpetual state of compassionate wisdom. But why did we think that it did? You know, so I guess we're back in the same place, you know? It's like, just we have bought into a lot of myths and fairy tales, and we're in the era where it's time to unpack them with a critical lens, you know? I guess that's I feel like I'm looping a little bit, but I think that's just um, another way of looking at this thing where, yeah, we need to bring in the missing parts. Okay, here's see if I can land what I've been trying to say. It's like we've got to realize that one, these subcultures were created by very specific niche people. You know, your neo tantra was made up by white Californian dudes who got their hands on a little bit of traditional Indian tech and then made it more about orgasms, and that's fine. But you got to understand that's where your lineage comes from. And alternative communities have alternative because they've rejected the mainstream, along with the functional infrastructure, the laws, the systems that you know, mainstream society is pretty sophisticated. It holds together quite fucking well. Science is very useful, you know? So we need to bring all of it back together, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's exactly. The piece that I wanted to come back to is you mentioned rejected initiations before.
Yes.
I'd like for you to speak a little bit more around what you actually mean. How does someone know they've
So,
rejected initiation or they're seeing it?
yeah, so like, what's a good example? The manosphere, right? That's a hot topic right now. Um, I would look at that entire thing as a sort of rejected initiation structure. So, um, what's an initiation? You know, it's a portal that you pass through that essentially transitions you from one stage to another. You know, the boy becomes a man. How does the boy become a man? Um, by facing an ordeal of some kind, facing a challenge, some pain usually is involved, you know, like we go to traditional initiations, you know, it's like, we're going to take you to the cave and put your hand in the ant's nest and you have to hold it in there, you know? Okay, that seems fucking insane from a modern point of view. What's the point of that? Well, up until now, this kid has been raised by their mum and they're a little bit, you know, soft and a little bit unaware of the world, and they haven't taken on the greater world yet. This is a moment where, in a concentrated, ritualized moment, they face a hard challenge, usually that involves some sort of pain or difficulty, but they are brought through it in the context of a cultural structure. It's not just like what would be our broken version. Some bullies got you and they put your hand in the ant nest and then they, you know, pushed you over and called you a faggot afterwards. And you're still thinking about that 20 years later because it was a shitty experience, you know? That's a non-contextualized initiation. A crappy thing happened. Um, those are the kind of things that maybe with some therapy and some recontextualization, like, actually, I realized that was my stepping into adulthood. You know, something happened then where I realized everybody in the world wasn't nice to me and everyone wasn't kind and soft, and it wasn't even all about me. And I now realize, looking back on it, um, that moment that wounded me was actually was my transition into manhood. I don't know where this came from. You know, you've rejected an initiation if you are still carrying pride and armor around it, you know? Like, if you look at, let's say all these manosphere dudes, it's been pointed out, most of those guys, you know, the Andrew Tate, HS Tiki Toki, all these guys, there's a missing father or a bullying father in the equation, right? So there's a damaged relationship to the masculine. That's not acknowledged. There's just been a jump to the hyper masculine. Yeah, so now I make money, I fuck bitches, you know, and I can fight. It's like, okay, like there is a version of that if the initiation was taken, of like, yeah, I have fucking gone in and met that wound. I have spent time and energy. God forbid, I spent time in therapy. Like, let's just imagine a therapized Andrew Tate. You know, not a weaponizing the language of therapy Andrew Tate. That'd be even worse. You know, but that'd be just even worse. There's plenty of those out there. Like an authentically went and spent some time going down into the wounds. You know, I was abandoned by my father, and that made me feel weak and pathetic. And I decided in that moment I would never be weak and pathetic. So instead, I'm going to be dominant, and instead, I'm going to be this and this. Fuck, I'm going to be with that. I'm going to somatically meet that, you know. And that was done sufficiently to begin to metabolize that. Maybe we get a version who's like, yeah, building a business is one way to build value as a man, and learning to relate to women is another pathway that is important as a man. And yes, health and fitness and strength and martial arts is another and these three pillars could actually form something really meaningful and useful, you know? And it'd be the same guy, but just like less of a fucking shadow dysfunctional version and more of a like, well, the only difference would need to be, yeah, I met what's really driving this and I'm in touch with that, you know? Versus can't fucking hurt me. I'm fucking invincible. Fuck everyone. I'm the alpha. Okay. Like the only people who don't think that is bullshit is men who are looking for that, you know, who are looking for that power because they either they're young, so they haven't gone through it yet, or they also um, never found a mature pathway to manhood. So, you know, pretty much almost all women and men with any emotional maturity we're not compelled by that narrative. But boys that haven't gone through that threshold yet and men who never really went through it are really drawn because they just want to feel powerful, you know? And of course they do. Everybody does. But I think that's a good example of like, yeah, the initiation there is basically the initiation is the wound. And if we don't go into the wound, then we never really meet or get the growth, the lessons, the transformation that's in that wound. This comes from classic men's work. Robert Bly, author of Iron John, there's this principle of the wound is the womb, you know? The boy going into the wound will be birthed out on the other side as the man is kind of the concept there.
I can see so many of the parallels as we've spoken about that the avoidance and that rejected initiation and how people end up in, you know, workshop space to workshop space and feeling like they're metabolizing the wound, but often they're just poking at it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tricky one, hey? Because I think there's the right intention of going into spaces that provide you some access. Yeah. And also, you know, then on the other side, we get this thing where, okay, so you're sitting in a circle and you're sharing your story, right? Or you're going into the emotion around the story and you're getting celebrated for that because it takes courage to do that and it's hard to do that. And I think some of that for a lot of people is probably necessary. Then at a certain point, you start to become someone who's good at doing that, you know? And that then becomes a source of significance and pride and status within the group. So you know what? Keep going back and keep doing that. And I'm gonna make my home now in the underworld. I fucking did this, you know. I really have done this. Like I now am going to spend extended time in the underworld. I'm not just going to go there to get, in the hero's journey, I go to the underworld to get the gold, and then I bring the gold back to the village. We got a lot of people who just kind of, setting up shop in the underworld, in the altar. I now live in the altar state. I now do ayahuasca every fucking month, you know. I now just constantly am at transformational festivals or whatever it is. I want to live there because it feels good and it feels magical and it feels special. And it's like, okay, well, if this is the weird kind of almost spiritual economics of it all. So I'm like, okay, so we've got tens of thousands of people doing the work and living in the place where they do the work. They never bring it back to the world. So we now have a world where a lot of people are doing some really good inner work, but it never gets metabolized into stuff that is going to serve the greater world. And what do? We sell back to the same community, right? We just fucking, the new age people sell to the new age people and, preaching to the choir kind of thing. So the people who don't need this work as much are now saturated in it. And people who do need it, they never really heard of it, or it's not really getting taken to them. So that's another strange, which would solve, by the way, this kind of povo new age thing of how, isn't it a strange subculture? Lots of people are masquerading as super rich, but a lot of people are really broke. And if people were more committed to take what they have learned to people who actually need it, who are probably not in their little subculture group, there would be an economic benefit from that as well. If you can authentically help people with stuff they haven't had access to yet, there's money to be made. If you are trying to sell shit to people who have already been exposed to that thing and have 20 options, it's very difficult.
Setting up shop in the underworld, that's one of those really common questions I get asked from my students is, how do I know when this is something I need to work on? I'm like, when it stops you from moving forward, has been my
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Agreed.
don't go seeking, it will find you.
Yeah.
But to your point, so much around the taking this work into places where people aren't already saturated in it, I feel like that we're coming kind of full circle there. It requires us to confront the parts where some of the dogma and the internalized narratives kind of fall apart. We're not used to interfacing with people that are actually implementing this in contexts that we haven't carefully curated for it to be applicable.
Oh, I ran a Dungeons and Dragons game last night at the pub, and all my characters are like, I've coded them all with planetary magic, so they're all like, one character is Venus, one character like that's, and so like, and D&D gigs for the most part are into fantasy magic. They're not into like ritual magic and astrology. Like so far, that's my, they're into that world. They don't know, and so like. And so I laid out all these characters and they can choose. And the characters have descriptions that are written by me, a very spiritual, new agey kind of person, in a lot. And so it's like, oh, it's like a monk character who's been exposed to the void, right? He's the black hole. And, oh, what does extremely present mean? And I'm like, what? I wouldn't even think of that as like, new agey language, but how do I fucking know? I've spent so much time in bubbles where, we speak fluent embodiment, spirituality, ascension, meditation. There's so many multiple lineages. There's therapy speak mixed with whatever. It's all coded in there and it's all normal. And so like, yeah, part of my journey in London is expanding into networks that are not, you know, tantric embodiment, spiritual, meeting entrepreneurs who are just like normal entrepreneurs. That's, they're not spiritual entrepreneurs. They're just entrepreneurs, or they're creatives, or they're this, and it's like, oh, even that is just stretching me. And yeah, I think got to get out of the bubble regularly.
And being so okay to recognize that when you had those moments of friction where someone doesn't get it, it doesn't mean that you aren't the right person to be there. It's an opportunity for you to grow into it. Like, particularly from like a coaching facilitation standpoint, it's like, cool, this has got lost in translation. How do I meet these people where they're at rather than retreating back into these spaces where we're comfortable and calling it growth?
Yeah, I think it's translation, it's like if you want to be, I mean, you know, I got my issues with the Christians, might come as a surprise, but they're really good at evangelism. The bar is set quite low. If you'll accept Jesus, you're in. That's it. That's it. Just say you like Jesus. Just say Jesus. Jesus. Okay, you're in. That's it. That's the barrier to entry. If you'll say Jesus, you can join. Um, the new age is much more like, oh, well, you don't know what chakras are? You don't use Sanskrit? Oh, you don't know, oh, you've never done ayahuasca. It's like, um, because people, massive generalization, there's a lot of people who weren't very cool in school, finally found a place where they can be cool. And so the, the exclusive bitchy, inner circles, it's like, well, we don't want anyone else to, this is an esoteric group. No one else can join. It's like, okay, well, all right, we're the inner circle of the inner circle. Yeah, there's two of us. There's no one else here. It's um, like exclusion is such a key part of it, right? And and I'm also not. I don't think everything should be inclusive of everyone, right? If you have a dinner party, you don't want 100 people to come. You want your eight chosen friends or curated people to come to make a beautiful evening. That's so fine. I think the balance is like inclusion and exclusion are a skill set that go together. Um, like spiritual people are obsessed with abundance, but actually, for me, wealth is the mastery of scarcity and abundance. It's a two-sided dynamic. This resource is less, this resource is more. There's always a balance on the balance sheet. It's not just abundance. It's like there's no such thing. There is um, abundance and scarcity is a paired reality. Um, so I just completely forgot what I was talking about. There you go.
Yeah, the subculture element to it, I think I have
Yes.
had rigorous training in growing up as a teenage goth. You didn't know the right band, you weren't a part of the clique. Um,
Right. Cultural capital is really important. And I vibe that too, and I just think it's just about, and I just want to say, like, none of this is me shitting on this culture. Like, I've spent 20 years in it really. And I think it's just about, I'm just trying to share from where I'm at on my specific, there's a temp, like, it's like we get to another level of the pendulum swings. So it's like, cool, how can I now integrate? I've developed really highly in this area. How do I now start to integrate the thing that I have atrophied in? Okay, I've been, strength training for 3 years in the gym. I'm really fucking strong. It's like, yeah, you're a bit stiff though. You don't move that well. So, okay, I'm now going to cultivate flexibility, mobility, openness. Oh, okay, I'm going to balance. Oh, now I've got a balance of strength and flexibility. It's the same with all this. It's like, okay, I've got really good at tracking my internal reality. I'm not so great at producing results in the world. I don't know how to track my behavior, my actual, what do I do? It's like, cool. It's called spreadsheets. They're going to be really helpful for you. You're going to hate them at first, but you're going to love them once you're actually good at them, or it's called, you know, less emotionalizing and more doing things, doing the do. Can I, whatever it is, whether it's sales calls or whether it's gym visits or, it's going to be external. I've been really internal. How do I mature the external? I've been really individual focused. Can I develop my social awareness? This is for so many. And like, I mean, it's rife in spiritual scenes, and I feel like Australians really have a problem with this, like um, I think socially being aware of social issues, like, I don't know. I think like the UK spiritual scene, I'm sure has the same head up your ass thing. The American spiritual scene for sure does. But I feel like there's a double risk in Australia in that we're so far away from everything you can sort of just ignore world events, and that is a beautiful blessing in a lot of ways, But I mean, find yourself at a potluck in Mullumbimby, and you're gonna potentially hear some of the most ignorant political opinions anywhere because it's people who haven't engaged outside of that realm, and you don't have Europe and the Middle East and whatever on your doorstep, so you don't have to think about it. You can just think about what's going on in Mullumbimby, and there's a gift in that, but there's also like there's a world going on, and you're not really participating in it. You're participating in a little fantasy world, and yeah, that's something that the more time I spend in Europe over the last 3 or 4 years, and I come back, or like, yeah, the Gold Coast Men's Work Pros, I'm like, wow. I'm talking about trans people or something, and it's like I could be talking about unicorns, or like it's like, what? Yeah, mate, they're just trying to put the drag queens in schools. It's like, wait, you've just read that in like some blog, some American thing. Like do you know, does that happen at your kid's school? No. Your friend's kid's school? No. Okay, that's just a piece of data you've picked up somewhere, And it's like that stuff is where I think um, there's a lot of room for growth, And I think if one key spiritual practice that helped me, that is really like a chaos magic practice, is like, can you believe the opposite thing that you believe? Can you try on the reverse belief and actually believe it through your little belief machine wholeheartedly, even for a minute? And if you can, it's going to pop some shit that is limiting you, actually. And I think that sort of stuff, yeah, I think a little more radical. It's funny because even in radical discontinuity, people like Istas uses this phrase, radical discontinuity, but we don't want to use it on our little bubble. We don't want to like believe something outside of a hetero tantra reality. That would be crazy. But we'll sit in a different chair. That's radical. Careful what comes out of my mouth at this point.
I literally gave somebody the advice of radical discontinuity the other day. It's one of the ones that when I was really early on in my coaching journey, someone shared that with me, and I know that power to be true of.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my gripes is that people really struggle with polarity and paradox, the ability to understand that two opposing truths can both at the same time be true.
And in fact are true. Like from whatever you really are certain of, I guarantee you the opposite thing from the right perspective is also fucking true. That's the real fucker. It's like, which then means certainty is just I just don't trust anyone who's too certain, and I now want to, because I now want to caveat that as not being a whole truth, but like it's been particularly in this context of new age spaces, like, well, this is just how it works. Like, fuck, you have no idea how the world works, do you? Like, I have literally witnessed the opposite side of that to be true, and I can sit in what you're saying and feel the truth of it, but not none of it's big T truth. A lot of it's just perspective. And I remember, shout out to Susie Kim. I'm gonna throw this one in there. I remember being at something with her and someone going on because all the judges are pedophiles and they're all this and that, and I was being like, excuse me, I have been mentored by some incredible judges in my time, and I need you to know that there are lots of people working inside the system that have given 30 or 40 years of their life to trying to do their role in the best way they can to support the world to function and be, and it's just like, oh, and it's like, have you ever met someone who's a judge? It's like, oh, I'm just saying, like they're all just, and it's like, no, that's factually not true. Like and it's just like, oh, it's a thing you say in conspiracy culture, it's just like, well, that's not everyone inside the system they're all reptilians, it's just like, okay, like, it's as a metaphor, is there a predatory aspect to, the dominant culture, to the system? Yeah, I can fully agree with it in that sense. The system eats its young. The system, the capitalist consumer paradigm is, at its core has a devouring nature to it. No problem. As a reptilian nature, but like, if you literally think that there are like lizard people that are, you know, not that this is tapped in on some sort of, because then we want to go into like, okay, energetically into the subtle realms. Yeah, sure, it's all there. It's all there. I have no problem with that. I'm so down with that. That's, I can work on. But like, do you literally think if we stormed into like, the prime minister's house right now and like got a knife and started cutting his face off, that we would find lizard scales underneath? Because if that's your operating, if you believe that, you should go and do that right now. You have a moral obligation to go and kill those people. This could really go badly wrong. If this was a soundbite, but like, this is the thing, right? I don't think these people fucking really believe it. I think they mean it in a sort of, I'm too lazy to properly think through how all this fits together. The world is terrifyingly complicated. And I don't want to fucking spend hours per day reading and trying to digest, the heavy mechanisms of how like politics works and how economics works and how human history has got us to where we are and how fucking intergenerational trauma works. It's a lot. That's all really a lot for all of us to deal with. But that's what you want to be looking at if you're trying to actually understand. At the bare minimum, those kind of will be the components, right? So instead, it's like, okay, my shorthand mythology is this sort of fantastical thing that the elements of the story, they sort of archetypally have a felt truth to them. That, yeah, the higher ups are feeding on the lower downs, and we might find out that some of that, it looks like, okay, some of it literally, but like, but there's a sort of a mythic shorthand being applied here just to avoid thinking, I think. And I think it's really fucking dangerous. Like, I think this is the part, like, low IQ, irrational beliefs have been really permitted in the new age space. And I think that's a bad thing. That, like, ultimately we have to go integral, which would mean integrating rationality, science, politics, all these things that I just want to feel my feelings and essentially take drugs and belong. It's like, well, you're not really advancing yourself as a human being by doing that. You're pretending. But if you were to integrate all these aspects together, then, and it's funny, we do go back to the Theosophical Society, even though it's quite dated. Their original hypothesis was a fusion of science and religion, um, that would point to a more accurate truth. And it's like, 100 odd years out of date. H.P. Blavatsky, what a character. But it was to me, more promising than like, we don't like science anymore. They all want you to get backs, It's like, okay, the laziness here is it's just astounding, like, so now we're anti-science, and now, and Dave, because women are like this and men are like this, and that's how it should be. And it's like, okay, so now we're heading back to the 1950s without any, okay.
It's one of those resources that all of my my clients that are listening to this, I go, there she goes again. But honestly, I feel that people can benefit from watching ContraPoint's video called Conspiracy on this. I think Natalie Wynn's breakdown on what actually occurs in conspiracism is fascinating. As a facilitator leader, that is really invaluable information.
Yeah, don't even start me on facilitators that are leading a room in whatever, like, let's assume their expertise, and then they start dropping their conspiracy theory worldview into the mix. And I'm like, that is not okay. It will be the same to me as like a teacher teaching my kids and they start dropping Christianity in the mix when it's like, you're a biology teacher. Like, what are you doing? Like, stop it. Like, this is not your, you don't have the right to abuse your position of authority and start weaving a mythos that is, you are highly unqualified to be doing that.
Yeah, part of it is literally that process of bringing it into the light. So credit to anyone that is doing that work on their biases.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about master your message.
Master your message. So I've had a couple of years off really launching anything new in terms of, I've done a lot of like 4-week, 3-week offerings, hyper focus on a specific subject that I've been nerding out on. So master your message is really targeted for anyone who is a creative, is doing content, is a facilitator, spiritual entrepreneur, founder, any of those kind of demographics who finds that they have a lot of their ideas dying on the vine. You've great ideas. I'm going to teach on this. I'm going to do a funny bit on this. I'm going to write a heartfelt blog on this. I'm going to do a video on this. And those ideas end up stuck in the notepad. You look a month later and say, I don't know if I want to do that now. And, essentially what I see is a lot of us have a lot of creative juice, a lot of ideas, a lot of inspiration, and a very small percentage of that actually makes it into being materialized. So master your message is about being able to like reach up, kind of grab the lightning and bring it down and put it in a bottle and get more of your inspiration packaged into product, content, art, whether it's songwriting, blogging, video making. And it's going to go through 3 stages. And the first stage is really world building. So rather than thinking about brand, everyone's imprisoned in like, I'm a brand. And it's like, you're not really a brand. You have a brand. Um, but I think brand is quite two dimensional. And I think if we look more at like world building, um, what are my aesthetic influences? What are the themes and flavors that I am about? What's my entire collection of who I am, what I represent, and the realm I'm building? Um, when we can do it that way, it means a lot more of us is welcome, but still there's a context that like I recognize that's Jess's style. I recognize that this is a subject that kind of relates to the other subjects she talks about, but there's a freedom. It's not this idea of I now only talk about relationships because I'm a relationships coach and now I feel stifled. So actually you are a multidimensional being. We need to capture all of that. And so world building is part 1. Part 2 is what I call the ideas factory. So, and this is built especially for neurodivergent creative people. So it's not a restrictive system. It's a adaptive supportive system. But essentially there needs to be some kind of system that takes your ideas from random idea to sort of more of a packaged up concept to a draft to a finished piece of work to something that gets scheduled. And if you think of it like a conveyor belt, if we're piling up ideas and then we can log in on a Tuesday and go, you know what? I like that one. I'm going to put that in my little machine and I'm going to make visual art, blogs, talks, etc. out of that. And then I'm going to schedule them all, or my VA is going to schedule them all. So the Idea Factory is a system for birthing those ideas into content. And then finally, we're going to look at essentially the minimum viable week, how to run a week in a business or a creative enterprise that ensures you get a little bit of everything done without feeling like you're have rebuilt a 9 to 5 or worse, so that the whole machine keeps moving forward. So really it's a combination of systemizing the structure around you so your creativity can be more free and so your channel can be have the satisfaction of compounding that I have ideas, I make them, I release them, then I am gifted with more ideas. Anyone who's interested in that can just come to my socials, to Instagram, whatever. I'll be talking a lot about Master Your Message over the next week or 2. And yeah, highly recommend anyone who's wanting also to be able to more consistent with your creativity. Like if you're like, I have bursts, I'm epic, I rock it for 2 weeks, then I go quiet for a month, and so does my income. This is going to help you package and bottle your lightning so you can just pump it out into the world, even if you're actually taking a rest and doing nothing. So master your message. Come do it.
I'll make sure that all of Dane's details are down in the show notes below. I will be doing Master Your Message, so if you decide to do it, great, excited to see you there. Any final thoughts, Dane?
Look, love the new age. I think we're tapping into something that wants to happen. I still believe that, I still believe essentially we are on the planet to evolve spiritually. I just think that we're also in an era where we're seeing the shortcomings of pretty much every tradition, lineage, and way of doing it that has come this far. And just don't be afraid to be honest, I think is where it's at. I think there is a bit that holds us back where it's like, fuck, if I start pulling this string, everything I've ever believed is going to reveal itself to be not true. And it's like, yeah, that's called spiritual awakening. Like that, what did you think you were signing up for? Just like goddess photo shoots and fucking men's work circle jerks. Like there's more, there is a process of unraveling that is asked of you. And that includes the political and the financial and the social, like of all dimensions. If spirituality includes all dimensions, then it's time for us to just be honest with ourselves. And this is the thing. I don't think you have to take on, because I don't want to take on that agenda. You know, the other this agenda. I don't think we have to take on any particular agenda. It's more about being curious and being willing to look at, you know, where are the things that have been done a certain way just because that's how they were done before? Well, that's how I facilitate, because that's how the people I learned to facilitate from facilitate. But actually, I did always feel a bit funny telling people to shut up or doing whatever the thing. Like, I think it's just tracking those things that, like, on some level, you always knew were off, but you didn't have another answer. I think it's time to be a little more vulnerable, dare I say, authentic, and just admitting, yeah, some of this shit is broken, and we don't have to um, keep perpetuating broken ways of doing things.
Yeah, that back to the rejected initiation. I feel like we are kind of facing off with, got to digest where we've been spiritually obese.
Yeah.
Mm.
Or spiritually, what's the other one?
Undernourished.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Bulimic was, yeah, spiritually bulimic. It's like I just go and just and then I reject it all for a little while, but then I come back and I do way too much again, and then I come anyway.
Thanks for coming, Dane. Pleasure as always.
Pleasure. Good talk.